Have you ever stood at a crossroads in life with fear in one hand and faith in the other? Have you ever cried in silence because the weight of one decision felt too heavy for your heart to carry? There are moments when life does not give you easy answers. There are moments when every door looks uncertain, every voice sounds confusing, and every step feels risky. In those moments, money cannot guide you. Friends cannot fully understand you. Logic alone cannot comfort you. You need something greater. You need wisdom from above. There are people listening to me right now who are facing difficult decisions. Some of you are trying to decide whether to stay or walk away. Some of you are praying about your family, your marriage, your career, your ministry, your future. You've been asking God, Lord, what should I do? Show me the way. Lead me down the right path. And I came to remind you today that our God is not the author of confusion. He is a God of clarity. He is a God of direction. He is a God who sees the end from the beginning. The enemy wants you to move in fear. The enemy wants you to rush into wrong decisions. The enemy wants your emotions to become louder than God's voice. But today, we are going to silence the noise. We are going to break the spirit of confusion. We are going to call on the wisdom of heaven to invade your situation. Because one God-given decision can change the entire course of your life. One moment of divine wisdom can save you from years of pain. One instruction from God can unlock doors no man can shut. The Bible says, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives generously. That means wisdom is available. Direction is available. Peace is available. You do not have to guess your way through life. You do not have to stumble in darkness. God will order your steps. God will light your path. God will reveal what is hidden and expose what is dangerous. So today, I need your spirit to rise up. I need your faith to wake up. This is not the season to make emotional decisions. This is not the season to move without prayer. This is the season to seek God like never before and declare, Lord, grant me wisdom when I have to make difficult decisions. And before this message is over, confusion will break, clarity will come, and your next step will be blessed. There are seasons in life when your own understanding will fail you. There are moments when your intellect cannot solve the problem, your experience cannot guide the path, and your emotions will only make the burden heavier. This is why surrender becomes the first step toward wisdom. Wisdom does not begin in the mind of man. Wisdom begins in the heart that bows before God. The moment you surrender your will, your plans, and your desires before the Lord, heaven begins to release direction into your life. Many people are asking God for answers while still holding tightly to their own agenda. They say, Lord, lead me. But secretly, they have already decided where they want to go. They say, Lord, speak to me, but only if his answer agrees with their feelings. True wisdom cannot flow where pride is sitting on the throne. True wisdom comes when you humble yourself and say, not my will, but yours be done. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is strength under control. Surrender is trusting that God sees what you cannot see. Sometimes the hardest battle is not against the devil. It is against your own desires. Your flesh wants immediate results. Your flesh wants comfort. Your flesh wants control. But God often calls you to walk by faith and not by sight. God may tell you to wait when your emotions say move. God may tell you to release something when your heart says hold on. God may tell you to go left when logic says go right. This is where surrender becomes your protection. When Abraham surrendered Isaac, he was surrendering more than a son. He was surrendering his future, his promise, his dream. Yet in that surrender, God provided. When Jesus surrendered in Gethsemane, he was surrendering his comfort to fulfill divine purpose. In surrender, there is pain, but in surrender, there is power. In surrender, there is sacrifice. But in surrender, there is supernatural provision. Some of you are struggling because you are carrying decisions God never asked you to carry alone. You are stressing over outcomes you cannot control. You are trying to force doors open that God may have closed for your protection. You are trying to make things happen in your own strength. But today, God is calling you to release it. Release the relationship. Release the fear. Release the timeline. Release the pressure. Put it in God's hands. When you surrender your will, peace begins to replace anxiety. When you surrender your plans, clarity begins to replace confusion. When you surrender your desires, wisdom begins to speak louder than emotions. God cannot steer a heart that refuses to trust him. But when you lay your life before him, he orders your steps. There is wisdom in waiting on God. There is wisdom in saying no when your flesh says yes. There is wisdom in obedience even when you do not understand. Every delayed blessing is not denial. Every closed door is not punishment. Sometimes God is protecting you from what you cannot discern. Sometimes God is preparing you for what you are not ready to receive. Today, God is asking one question. Can you trust me with the decision? Can you trust me with the unknown? Can you trust me when the answer is not immediate? Because the moment you surrender completely, wisdom begins to flow freely. And when heaven's wisdom leads you, you will never be lost. Emotional decisions often feel powerful in the moment, but they can quietly become the reason for lifelong regret. There are moments when the heart speaks louder than wisdom, when feelings rise higher than faith, and when urgency pushes a person to act before understanding. In those moments, everything inside you feels right, but not everything that feels right is actually guided by truth. Emotion is a gift, but when it becomes your guide instead of God's wisdom, it can lead you into places you never intended to go. There are people who made decisions in anger and lost relationships they later cried for. There are people who made decisions in fear and walked away from opportunities that were meant to bless their future. There are people who made decisions in loneliness and ended up in situations that drained their spirit instead of healing it. Emotion has a voice, but emotion does not always have vision. It can see the pain of the present, but cannot see the consequences of tomorrow. When you are emotionally overwhelmed, your perception becomes distorted. What looks like the only option in the moment may not even be the right option in reality. That is why rushing is dangerous when your heart is unsettled. God never leads his people through confusion and haste. The voice of God brings peace even when the instruction is difficult. Emotional decisions, however, often come with pressure, restlessness, and inner turmoil. There is a difference between being led by peace and being driven by pressure. When God is leading you, even correction carries calmness. Even conviction carries clarity. Even discipline carries direction. But when emotions are leading you, even choices that seem small can feel overwhelming and chaotic. You begin to react instead of reflect. You begin to speak before listening. You begin to move before understanding. The enemy often uses emotion as a shortcut to destruction. He knows that if he can provoke you, he can push you. If he can agitate your feelings, he can bypass your wisdom. That is why some of the biggest mistakes in life are not made in ignorance, but in emotional intensity. Anger can make you walk away from something God told you to stay in. Fear can make you stay in something God told you to leave. Sadness can make you isolate yourself from the very people God sent to help you grow. This is why spiritual maturity is not about suppressing emotions, but submitting them. God does not ask you to stop feeling. He asks you to stop letting feelings lead. When emotions rise, wisdom must rise higher. When your heart is shaken, your spirit must become anchored. When confusion tries to enter, prayer must become your response, not impulse. There are moments when silence is more powerful than reaction. There are moments when waiting saves you from walking into regret. There are moments when stepping back is not weakness, but protection. The wise person learns to pause when emotions are loud and seek God before making any move. Because what you decide in an emotional storm will have to be lived out in calm seasons. God is not absent in your emotional battles. He sees every tear, every frustration, every internal struggle. But he is inviting you to let him govern your decisions, not just your feelings. When emotions are surrendered, they become tools instead of traps. They become signals instead of masters. They become part of your humanity, not the ruler of your destiny. There is a higher way of living where decisions are not dictated by what hurts today, but by what God is building for tomorrow. In that place, wisdom begins to silence reaction, and understanding begins to replace Impulse prayer is not just a ritual, it is a divine connection that unlocks clarity in the middle of confusion. When decisions become heavy and the mind becomes crowded with thoughts, prayer becomes the place where heaven begins to speak. There are answers that will never come through human advice, and there are directions that will never be found through logic alone. Prayer is where human limitation meets divine instruction. It is in that secret place where wisdom begins to flow without noise, without pressure, without confusion. Many people try to solve spiritual problems with natural thinking. They ask everyone around them, but forget to ask God first. They analyze, they worry, they compare options, but they do not pause long enough to hear the voice that actually holds the answer. Prayer is not the last option. It is the first access point to wisdom. When prayer becomes your foundation, confusion loses its power over your decisions. There is something powerful that happens when a person truly enters prayer with sincerity. It is not about repeating words, it is about opening the heart. In that moment, burdens begin to shift. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable. What once felt unclear begins to gain direction. Prayer does not always change the situation immediately, but it always changes the person inside the situation. And when you are changed, your decisions begin to change as well. God has never hidden his wisdom from those who seek him. The problem is not that God is silent. The problem is that many hearts are too distracted to listen. Prayer removes distraction. It quiets fear. It slows down urgency. It brings alignment between heaven's will and human desire. When you pray, you are not convincing God to agree with you. You are allowing God to align you with his perfect plan. There are decisions that look complicated in the natural, but become simple in the presence of God. One moment of true prayer can bring more clarity than weeks of overthinking. Because in prayer, God begins to reveal what your eyes cannot see. He exposes hidden dangers, he confirms right timing, and he strengthens your inner knowing. This is why prayer is not wasted time. It is divine investment. Sometimes God does not answer immediately because he is shaping your heart to receive the right answer. In prayer, patience is developed. Discernment is sharpened. Faith is strengthened. You begin to understand that not every open door is a God door, and not every delay is a denial. Prayer teaches you to trust the process of divine timing instead of rushing into human solutions. When you are in prayer, you are also protected from wrong influences. Many decisions become wrong, not because the options are bad, but because the environment around you is loud. People's opinions, emotional pressure, and personal fears can all distort your judgment. But in prayer, those voices begin to fade, and the voice of God becomes clearer than everything else. Wisdom is not always loud. Sometimes it is a still, gentle understanding that settles in your spirit during prayer. It does not force you, it guides you. It does not confuse you, it settles you. It does not rush you, it stabilizes you. That is why those who pray consistently often make better decisions, not because life is easier for them, but because their hearing becomes sharper. Prayer also builds trust. The more you pray, the more you realize that you are not alone in your decisions. You begin to understand that God is involved in every detail, even the ones you overlook. This awareness removes anxiety. It replaces fear with confidence that you are being led, even when you cannot yet see the full path ahead. In a world full of noise, distractions, opinions, and emotional pressure, hearing the voice of God becomes one of the greatest challenges in decision making. It is not that God stops speaking, but that life becomes too loud for clarity to be recognized. The voice of confusion is always competing with the voice of direction. Fear speaks loudly, doubt speaks loudly, human advice speaks loudly. But the voice of God is different. It is steady, peaceful, and often quiet enough that only a focused heart can recognize it. Many people struggle in life not because they lack options, but because they cannot distinguish which voice to follow. Every direction seems convincing in the moment. Every opinion feels important. Every emotion feels urgent. But wisdom is the ability to recognize which voice carries truth and which voice only creates pressure. When you are standing at a crossroads, what you hear will determine where you go, and where you go will determine what you become. God has never been silent, but he often speaks in ways that require sensitivity. Sometimes he speaks through peace that settles in your spirit when something is right. Sometimes he speaks through a gentle warning when something is wrong. Sometimes he speaks through closed doors that redirect your path. Sometimes he speaks through delay that protects your timing. But if your life is too noisy, you may miss all of it. The challenge is that confusion often sounds like urgency. It pushes you to act quickly, to decide fast, to move without reflection. But the voice of God does not rush your soul. It anchors it. Even when God is leading you into something new, there is still a sense of calm assurance underneath it. That is how you know it is him. He does not pressure you into panic. He leads you into peace. There are seasons where you must intentionally quiet everything around you to hear clearly. Not every opinion deserves attention. Not every voice deserves agreement. Not every feeling deserves action. When too many voices are speaking at once, wisdom becomes difficult to recognize. That is why discernment is essential. Discernment is not just knowing right from wrong. It is knowing what to ignore and what to follow. Some people miss divine direction because they are too influenced by human voices. They value approval more than alignment. They trust popularity more than peace. They follow what sounds logical instead of what feels spiritually right. But God's wisdom often contradicts human reasoning. What God calls you to do may not always make sense to others, but it will always carry purpose and protection. The enemy often uses noise to distort direction. If he can overwhelm your thoughts, he can influence your choices. If he can keep you emotionally unstable, he can make you spiritually unclear. That is why internal silence is so powerful. Not the absence of life, but the presence of stillness in your spirit. In that stillness, clarity begins to rise. When you learn to recognize God's voice, you stop being easily moved by pressure. You stop reacting to every opinion. You stop making decisions just to escape discomfort. Instead, you begin to wait until peace confirms your steps. Because true wisdom does not just answer the question of what to do, it also confirms when and how to do it. There is a place in God where confusion no longer dominates your thinking. In that place, decisions become clearer, fear loses influence, and direction becomes steady, even in uncertain situations. That is the place where the voice of God becomes louder than everything else around you. Patience is one of the most overlooked keys to wisdom, yet it is often the very thing that protects people from lifelong regret. In moments of pressure, when everything in you wants immediate answers, patience feels like delay. But in the kingdom of God, patience is not delay. It is protection. It is the space where clarity is formed, where emotions settle, and where divine direction becomes unmistakable. Many wrong decisions are not made because people lacked opportunity, but because they lacked the ability to wait long enough for truth to become clear. When decisions feel urgent, the human heart naturally wants to move quickly. It feels like if you do not act now, you will lose everything. That urgency creates pressure, and pressure often leads to mistakes. But wisdom understands that not every urgent feeling is a divine instruction. Sometimes urgency is just anxiety in disguise. Sometimes it is fear pushing you to escape discomfort instead of waiting for understanding. Patience gives you the ability to see beyond the moment. It allows time to reveal what emotion tries to hide. Many things look different after time passes. What seemed like a perfect opportunity can later reveal hidden problems. What seemed like a painful delay can later reveal divine protection. What seemed like a closed door can later be understood as God redirecting you away from harm. Patience gives truth the space it needs to surface. There are people who rushed into decisions in relationships, careers, or life directions, and later realized they ignored warning signs they could not see clearly in the moment. Not because the signs were not there, but because impatience blocked their ability to process them. When you rush, you often see what you want to see, not what is actually in front of you. Patience corrects that distortion. God often uses waiting seasons to prepare both the situation and the person. While you are waiting for answers, God is also shaping your character to handle the answer. Because sometimes the problem is not just receiving direction, but being able to sustain what comes after the decision. Without patience, people may receive blessings they are not mature enough to handle. That is why delay is not always punishment. Sometimes it is preparation. Patience also strengthens discernment. When you wait, emotions lose intensity and clarity begins to rise. What felt confusing becomes easier to understand. What felt overwhelming becomes more structured in your mind. Waiting allows you to separate fear from truth, impulse from wisdom, and desire from divine instruction. In that space, decisions become more accurate. There is also a spiritual dimension to patience where trust is developed. Waiting forces you to rely on God instead of your own timing. It teaches you that you are not in control of everything. And that is not a weakness, it is a place of surrender. When you learn to wait with faith instead of frustration, your heart becomes more aligned with God's process. Impatience often leads to shortcuts, and shortcuts often lead to complications. What is gained quickly is sometimes lost quickly, but what is built through patience tends to last. Wisdom understands that lasting outcomes require steady steps, not rushed movements. Even when the path feels slow, patience ensures that each step is secure. There are moments in life when silence and waiting are more powerful than immediate action. In those moments, resisting the urge to move too soon becomes an act of wisdom. Because when you allow God's timing to unfold, you often discover that what you thought you were waiting for was actually waiting for you to be ready. Fear has a way of disguising itself as urgency, logic, and even responsibility. But at its core, it is one of the greatest distorters of wisdom. When fear enters the decision-making process, it narrows vision. It makes tomorrow look darker than it really is. It exaggerates danger and minimizes possibility. It pushes the heart into survival mode instead of spiritual clarity. In that state, decisions are no longer guided by peace, but by pressure. There are moments in life when uncertainty is real, when outcomes are not visible, and when the path ahead feels unstable. In those moments, fear begins to speak loudly. It says, act quickly before you lose everything. It says, choose something, anything, just to escape discomfort. But fear-driven decisions are rarely stable decisions. They may bring temporary relief, but often lead to long-term confusion. Faith, on the other hand, does not ignore reality, but it refuses to be controlled by it. Faith allows you to acknowledge uncertainty without surrendering your peace to it. It gives you the ability to stand in the middle of unanswered questions and still remain anchored. When faith is present, fear loses authority over your direction. The challenge many people face is not the absence of options, but the presence of emotional pressure. Fear magnifies consequences. It makes small problems look overwhelming and unknown futures feel threatening. It creates a sense that if you do not act immediately, everything will collapse. But wisdom recognizes that panic is not a reliable guide for life-changing decisions. There's a difference between caution and fear. Caution is wise. It observes, it evaluates, it seeks understanding. Fear, however, is reactive. It rushes, it assumes, it imagines worst-case scenarios. Caution leads to thoughtful decisions. Fear leads to impulsive ones. One builds stability, the other creates instability. When fear dominates your thinking, you begin to interpret everything through a negative lens. Opportunities look risky instead of promising. Closed doors feel like rejection instead of redirection. Delays feel like punishment instead of preparation. Fear distorts perception. And when perception is distorted, decisions become unreliable. God never leads his people through fear. Even when he corrects, there is peace in his correction. Even when he redirects, there is clarity in his instruction. Fear always produces confusion, but divine guidance produces peace, even in uncertainty. That is how you know the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of wisdom. There are people who stayed in wrong situations because fear told them leaving would be worse than staying. There are others who left right opportunities because fear told them they were not enough. Fear has stopped more destinies than failure ever has. It convinces people to settle, to hesitate, to retreat from what God may be calling them into. Faith requires courage to move beyond what you can see. It does not deny risk, but it trusts that God is greater than risk. When faith is active, fear begins to lose its influence over your choices. You begin to think with clarity instead of anxiety. You begin to act from peace instead of panic. Wisdom is closely connected to faith because both require trust in what is not fully visible. Fear demands immediate proof before movement. Faith allows trust to precede understanding. That is why faith produces stability while fear produces instability. There is a place in spiritual maturity where fear no longer dictates decisions. In that place, even uncertainty does not shake your inner peace. Even unanswered questions do not push you into wrong directions. Instead, there is a steady confidence that God is still guiding. Even when everything around you is unclear timing, is one of the most powerful dimensions of wisdom, yet it is often the most ignored. Many people focus on what to do, but they overlook when to do it. In reality, the success or failure of a decision is not only determined by the choice itself, but also by the timing of that choice. Even a right decision made at the wrong time can lead to unnecessary struggle, while a delayed answer from God can still produce perfect outcomes when it arrives in divine timing. Human nature prefers speed. It wants immediate results, quick answers, and instant clarity. But God operates beyond human urgency. His timing is not random, nor is it delayed by accident. It is precise, intentional, and aligned with outcomes that the human mind cannot always see in advance. What feels like waiting is often preparation in disguise. What feels like delay is often protection in motion. There are seasons when you feel ready for something, but God knows that circumstances are not yet aligned. You may feel emotionally prepared, but the environment may not be stable. You may feel confident, but there may still be unseen risks. God sees all layers at once, not just your desire, but also the full picture of consequences, connections, and future impact. That is why his timing carries wisdom that human planning cannot match. When people ignore timing, they often force doors that are not yet meant to open. They try to accelerate processes that require maturity, patience, or external alignment. This creates unnecessary struggle. Forced timing often leads to exhaustion, frustration, and outcomes that do not fully reflect God's best. But when you move in alignment with divine timing, even difficult paths become smoother because you are walking within prepared seasons. There are also moments when God delays something not because he is withholding, but because he is arranging. Behind the scenes, things are being positioned that you cannot yet see. People are being prepared, opportunities are being aligned, and circumstances are being shaped in ways that will support your future step. If you move too early, you may step into a situation that has not yet been fully prepared for you. Timing also protects you from entering places where your character is not yet ready to sustain what your desire wants. Sometimes what you are asking for requires growth that has not yet been completed. If it arrives too soon, it may overwhelm you. But when it comes in God's timing, you have the strength, maturity, and wisdom to handle it without destruction. Wisdom learns to respect seasons. There is a time to wait, a time to prepare, a time to act, and a time to release. Discernment is knowing which season you are in. Many mistakes happen when people operate in the wrong season, trying to harvest when they should still be planting, or trying to run when they should still be learning. God's timing often brings peace even when circumstances are uncertain. When something is aligned with his timing, there is a quiet assurance in your spirit, even if everything is not fully visible. That inner peace becomes a confirmation that you are not moving ahead of God, nor falling behind him, but walking with him. When timing is respected, outcomes often carry long-term stability. What is built in alignment with divine timing tends to last because it is supported by wisdom beyond human understanding. Even when delays feel uncomfortable, they are not empty. They are forming something deeper that will only make sense when the moment finally arrives. One wise decision guided by God's wisdom has the power to redirect the entire course of a life. It may seem small in the moment, it may look simple on the surface, but its impact can reach years into the future. Many people underestimate the weight of a single choice, not realizing that destiny is often shaped in moments that feel ordinary. The direction of a life is rarely changed by one dramatic event, but more often by one carefully chosen step made in alignment with truth. There are decisions that open doors that were once impossible to access. There are decisions that protect you from pasts that would have drained your strength. There are decisions that connect you with people who elevate your purpose. And there are decisions that separate you from influences that were silently limiting your growth. Wisdom does not always feel exciting in the moment, but it always carries long-term clarity. When God's wisdom is involved in a decision, even uncertainty becomes meaningful. You may not see the full picture immediately, but there is a quiet assurance that the direction is right. That assurance is not based on emotion, but on alignment. It is the kind of inner peace that remains steady, even when external circumstances are still developing. Many people regret decisions not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked wisdom at the moment of choice. Intelligence can analyze options, but wisdom understands consequences. Intelligence can compare opportunities, but wisdom discerns outcomes. Intelligence can gather information, but wisdom knows when to act and when to wait. That is why one wise decision is more powerful than 100 emotional reactions. There are moments when choosing differently changes everything that follows. A single yes can lead to blessing, and a single no can prevent unnecessary pain. A single step in the right direction can save years of confusion. A single act of obedience can unlock a future that seemed unreachable. This is the power hidden inside wise decision-making. Wisdom also has the ability to break cycles. Some people repeat the same struggles because decisions are made without reflection or guidance. But when wisdom enters, patterns begin to shift. You begin to choose differently, respond differently, and think differently. That shift creates a new direction for your life. What once felt like repetition begins to turn into progress. God's wisdom does not only guide major life choices, it also influences small decisions that later produce large outcomes. Who you listen to, where you go, what you accept, and what you refuse all begin to matter. Each small decision becomes part of a larger picture that only becomes clear over time. There is also a supernatural dimension to wise decisions. When a decision is aligned with God's guidance, it often carries favor that you did not manufacture. Doors open without force. Opportunities appear without struggle. Support comes without manipulation. This is because wisdom aligns you with divine flow rather than human effort alone. One wise decision can separate confusion from clarity, delay from progress, and limitation from expansion. It can move you out of cycles that kept you stuck and place you into seasons that were previously inaccessible. It is not about perfection in every step, but about alignment in the most important steps that shape direction. In the end, the value of wisdom is not fully seen in the moment of decision, but in the life that follows it. And sometimes, everything begins to change from just one step taken in the right direction under divine guidance.